Star Wars, Dark Force Dictator by Paul Martin, 2020. This is an independent work of fan fiction. Centuries before the ascension to power of Emperor Palpatine, Jedi Master Jingo Garkin and his apprentice are sent on an investigative mission to a remote planet on the edges of the galaxy. A sinister disturbance in the Force awaits them at their destination. Chapter 1. Coruscant Summit. Jedi Master Jingo Garkin and his young Padawan Jevil made their way through the busy Coruscant district for their appointment with the high-ranking politician who represented a portion of the Outer Rim region. He was a rough-looking man with beady, piercing eyes, a beard and moustache that was turning grey, and battle scars on his face. Jevil was a young girl with freckles and orange hair tied in ponytails. Both wore rough, well-worn brown robes of the Jedi. They hurried past beggars, seedy-looking street vendors, and well-dressed people accompanied by droid or sentient bodyguards. They arrived at the Great Hyperspace Commemoration Building. It towered a massive 7 kilometres in height and was heavily guarded by blue and grey uniformed security troops. The two Jedi produced their identification cards and permission swipe cards for clearance. After surrendering their lightsabers, they took the express lift to the very top. 10 minutes later, they were looking down at a sprawling, massive, chaotic planet off in the distance. Air pollution rose in many corners. 1/4 of Coruscant was still jungle, but this was under threat from the constant encroachment of sentient beings. New settlers were pouring into the forests to hunt and live off the land. This was coupled with corrupt property developers destroying forests for prime real estate. There was so much corruption and under-the-table dealings that no real action would likely happen until it was too late, and the politicians lacked the will to implement any changes. The lift came to a halt, and the bell chimed. The doors opened. They were greeted by a lady with reddish hair, light green skin, and blue robes. "Good afternoon, Jedi. I am Livian Hark, secretary to the senator. Follow me." They went into a large, spacious room. A middle-aged man in senatorial robes, grey hair, and gold medallions around his neck rose to meet them. Livian said, "Senator, may I introduce you to Jedi Master Jingo Garkin and Padawan Jevil." Then, to the Jedi, she said, "Outer Rim Senator Pelion Skywalker." He gave them each a firm handshake and a bow in respect. "As you may be aware, I am in charge of nearly 200 star systems that I am supposed to represent. Most senators take care of just one, but not me. I do my best, but these systems are a chaotic mess, and the Senate refuses to fund more senators. If I complain, I could lose my job and be replaced by someone indifferent." Jingo Garkin nodded, so Skywalker continued. "As you know, the Alderaanian Civil War has claimed the lives of over 4 billion beings, and it shows no signs of slowing down. It breaks my heart to no end, such carnage and horrors," he said, looking thoughtful and close to tears. "Obviously, Alderaan is not in my jurisdiction, but the sources for the carnage seem to be coming from the Outer Rim. There are confirmed reports that massive arms shipments are made to Alderaan to help both sides of the war from a backwater planet called Gangaloria. It's part of my jurisdiction, There are reports of a sinister witch ruling as absolute dictator. The armament sales are evidently giving her unlimited finances. She may also owe me a huge tax debt, which I would like investigated. Skywalker paused to let them digest this information. Then Jingo Garkin spoke. The only true power in the galaxy is the Force. It could be a Force-sensitive individual, although we Jedi usually detect them and recruit them for the Jedi Order from infancy. Might it be a rogue Jedi who has left the Order? Asked Skywalker. That's very unlikely, but not impossible, I suppose, said Jingo. A few days ago, I spoke via a hologram to a Jedi warrior based on Alderaan, trying to keep the peace. His name is Yoda. Do you know him? Asked Skywalker. Jingo and Jeffel shook their heads. I suppose not. There's tens of thousands of Jedi and he's far away on Alderaan, but when I described the Dictator, he said it sounded like she's strong in the Force. Yoda is over 150 years old, so I think his opinion should carry some weight. Jingo nodded in deep thought, and the senator continued. So I'm sending you on a mission to Gangaloria, all expenses paid by the Senate. My secretary Livian will accompany you. You will be transported by Pep Hook, an experienced navigator who is perfect for the job. He's a native of Alderaan. You will be travelling in a cheap spaceship, less likely to attract pirates. My bodyguard, LV-9, will join you for your own protection. A blue and red humanoid droid emerged. LV-9 has lightning reflexes and is very handy as an assassin. He does jobs needed while you sleep during your 4 days' journey to Gangaloria. LV-9 was the size of a man and was armed with laser guns attached to his hands, elbows and back, and could see in all directions. He raised his arm by way of greeting. I am LV-9, assassin and protective service droid, at your service. Pelion Skywalker rose from his desk and motioned for them to follow. He led them outside to the top of the building. There was a spaceship facing them. 2 blue and grey security guards handed the Jedi back their lightsabers. A pudgy, middle-aged man with stubble on his chin, a balding head, and various battle scars greeted them. You must be Pep Hook, said Jingo. At your service, he said with a nod. Jingo, Jeffel, Livian, and LV-9 followed him aboard the ship. Pelion stood by with his guards and waved goodbye. Livian smiled and waved to her boss, but deep down she despised him from the bottom of her heart. To say he was lazy, incompetent, callous and corrupt would be a great understatement. He only did favours for secretaries that were pretty and would sleep with him. Livian was neither. Out of the 20 employees working for Pelion, 15 of them were pretty young women. The other 5 were an unscrupulous crime contact, 2 political campaign agents, a crooked lawyer, and herself. But she did have good negotiation skills, so he would put her to good use. Pelion had insisted on sending her to represent him, which is usually a great honour. After all, she was far more sophisticated and intelligent at diplomacy than an ascetic Jedi, his naive 12-year-old Padawan, and the uncouth navigator. The real reason was to avoid going to the Outer Rim and putting himself at risk. Besides, She was his least attractive secretary and had requested a pay rise at their last meeting. As far as he was concerned, the crew was cannon fodder, sent to make him look good, or die in the process. His most valued member of the mission was LV-9, but LV-9 was protected by insurance and he would get a better model if he lost the droid. Whatever was spent on this expedition, he would make the Senate foot the bill, but he would pocket the substantial tax fee from Gangaloria. He smiled heartily, waved goodbye, then sneered cynically as he walked away. Chapter 2. Interstellar Voyage. The company was seated securely until they had exited Coruscant's atmosphere. Then they were able to move freely in the ship. LV-9 was co-pilot. There were 2 sleeping quarters in the spaceship, each with just a double bed. Jingo insisted he and Jevil share a room together, but Pep pointed out that it was more appropriate for the men to be in one room and the ladies in the other. Jingo was still uncomfortable allowing Jevil to become close to anyone other than himself, especially if they were not Jedi. As it approached dinner time, LV-9 served them flight meals consisting of gruel and stodge. Livian was infuriated at this low-budget travel stinginess. To break the ice after dinner, Pep suggested a game of sabacc, which the 4 of them got engrossed in. After the game, Pep took out a few beverages and attempted to make conversation with Livian. Livian couldn't stand the sight of him and politely declined a drink. Pep had known Livian for 5 years through contact with Pelion. From the moment he met her, he was smitten. He had attempted to ask her out for dinner or a ride in his spaceship. She declined him every time until he gave up hope. As far as Livian was concerned, most men in the upper levels of Coruscant were not worthy of her attention, much less a low-life associate of her corrupt boss. Livian was approaching middle age, had never married, never had children. She always said it was her dedication to making the galaxy a better place. The real reason was she wanted to marry a famous or wealthy big shot in Coruscant and spend the rest of her life attending gala dinners, opera concerts, and regular holidays to the skiing resorts on Hoth or the idyllic mountains of Naboo. Instead, she found that the politicians were narcissistic pricks who couldn't care less about anyone but themselves. They were mostly married to high-status women, while also having affairs with their secretaries. Jingo was willing to be Pep's drinking partner. Pep told some crude and vulgar jokes that the religious Jedi Master did not find the least bit funny. But after a few more drinks they were off their heads, and Jingo told jokes that even made Pep blush. Livian, instead, sat at the other end of the dining room on a couch and had a deep and meaningful conversation with Jevil. During the conversation, Livian could sense the hatred of Jingo's eyes burning into her. He glared at her as she slipped off a beautiful blue and red bracelet from her wrist and insisted Jevil take it. Jevil beamed all over. She was too excited to sleep as they retired to their quarters. Jevil and Livian talked about endless topics for several more hours, while lying in bed in the dark. For Livian, it was pleasant to talk to a naive, idealistic young girl hitting puberty, instead of myriads of cynical and frustrated bureaucrats on Coruscant. For Jevil, it was refreshing talking to an ordinary woman instead of her gruff, middle-aged male superior who seemed to care about nothing but her Jedi skills. Even the female mentors she had had in her earlier years were not much different. The two ladies felt a deep bond. The next morning, despite their late-night talking, they were up bright and early, enjoying breakfast gruel together. 1 hour later, Pep and Jingo made their way out, badly hungover. Pep looked at the ladies. "Sorry if we were a bit loud and crass last night. You know, we men get a bit rowdy after a few drinks." Livian suppressed her urge to laugh, but just smiled and nodded. She couldn't help but like this bumbling buffoon of a ship's captain, despite her initial dislike of him. Jingo looked over at Jevil with a stern and serious look of intensity. "My drinking last night is not some licence for you to be undisciplined and slack in your training. I've earned the right to do that. You haven't." "Yes, Master Jingo," replied Jevil. "That's it?" thought Livian to herself. "No apology? No admission of guilt? What a load of bantha shit! What a scruffy-looking nerf herder!" But she kept her thoughts to herself. After breakfast, Pep resumed control of the ship and allowed LV9 a chance to oil his joints and recharge his batteries. Jingo and Jevil went to the exercise room to study Jedi philosophy and theory. Livian opened her computer file on Gangaloria. It was a bizarre planet. It was declared a galactic heritage site with no sentient beings except for one single walled-off city with 100,000 people and a few nearby mining sites. Outside the city were wild reptilian beasts, almost 100 times as big as a human. There were some primitive ape men on isolated islands, but they had no language and only used fire and stone tools. The humans in the city were the custodians who had fled from another remote planet 50 years earlier. As to their origin, it was shrouded in mystery. What they were presently doing was enjoying their splendid isolation, producing weapons and innumerable pieces of military hardware. Livian read reports alleged against its dictator, whose name was not even known. She was apparently the head of a group called the Red Council, and had been ruling since the founding of Gangaloria City 50 years ago. Numerous dissidents had been murdered or mysteriously disappeared, even in other parts of the galaxy. No wonder Pelion had volunteered her to this mission. She had a discussion with the Jedi Master. He said, "This could be far more serious than we realise. I'm convinced that there must be someone in the Red Council, possibly their mysterious leader, who knows the ways of the Force. If so, it means they're using the Force for evil and not good." Livian resisted the urge to say, "Thanks, Captain Obvious." But what Jingo Garkin had said was deeply profound and disturbing if his speculation was correct. Jingo reached out to the Force for information. All he got was an overwhelming feeling of purpose and destiny, as if he had been born and prepared his whole life for the events that were about to transpire. Chapter 3, Gangaloria. On the 4th day of the journey, Livian was getting stir-crazy. The stoical Jedi pair and the experienced captain were more used to arduous travel. Then Gangaloria came into view. The small green shining dot became bigger and bigger as they approached it. Next, they brought up the map to find the capital city and the landing port. After one more hour of reaching the planet's orbit, they began their descent. Gangaloria City was a sprawling mass of homes and small farms scattered across with factories for production. The landing bay was found and they parked on a vacant spot. Livian used the credit card to pay the rental fee. Pep Hook was shaven and put into more respectable clothing. LV-9 was left behind to guard the ship. Nevertheless, they kept a tracking device and radio contact in case he needed to find them. Jingo and Jevil hid their lightsabers under their robes. Then the four of them headed to the Imperial Palace of the Red Council. Many Outer Rim planets had lawless gangs patrolling the streets and thugs picking fights with people. But not here. The streets were immaculately clean. There were stormtroopers in khaki-coloured armour, similar to the planet's terrain, patrolling the streets. They had helmets on, although it did not cover their faces. Throughout the streets, there were factory workers, presumably on lunch break, eating quietly and orderly. There were daycare centres with children running around, and one child ran up to the fence and screamed, "Daddy!" The stormtrooper smiled and blew a kiss to his little one. They continued further along. A battalion of stormtroopers were firing on targets. They were pretty lethal and had some sharpshooters in their midst. Finally, they came into view of the palace. It doubled as the military barracks, which reflected a security-conscious people. Livian noticed that they were being followed at a distance by stormtroopers. One of their stalkers was talking quietly via radio transmission. As they approached the gates of the palace, they saw a grey uniformed officer talking on a radio who made a wave to their stalker. He was flanked by 10 men with guns trained on the visitors. The officer approached them with a pleasant smile and said, "Good afternoon, fine people. I am Lager Fist, Security Chief for Gangaloria City. How may I be of assistance to you?" Livian spoke. "I am Ms. Livian Hark, representative of Senator Pellion Skywalker of the Outer Rim region of the Galactic Republic. This is a diplomatic visit and inspection. We ask to be taken to the leader of your Red Council promptly." "We were not informed of any visit from the Republican Senate. May I ask what this is in regard to?" Livian snapped at him. "I will remind you, sir, that this is a diplomatic mission from the Senate. As per Section 18936 of the Galactic Diplomatic Code, a planet's senator or his representative has the right at any time to make a visit for the purpose of inquiries, diplomacy, inspection, or investigation, and shall neither be hindered nor opposed by the said planet's authorities." The commander, realising he was out of his depth, simply nodded and said, "Apologies, madam. No offence was intended. Please come in so I may process your request." He led them into a foyer and motioned for them to sit on some couches. He disappeared. While they waited, Pep noticed hidden cameras placed on the tables on a pot plant and signalled to the others to watch what they said. About 10 minutes later, Lager appeared again. "Our leader will see you. Please hand over your weapons, and we shall return them to you after you leave." Pep Hook handed a stormtrooper his blaster. Then the officer held out his hands to Jevil and Jingo Garkin. "Your lightsabers, please." Jingo frowned. He was certain they had kept them hidden. Had Jevil been incompetent? Jevil said nothing, waiting to see what her master would do first. He rose and said, "You don't want to take our lightsabers." The officer suppressed a laugh. "I do want to take your lightsabers." He pointed to an X-ray surveillance camera on the wall. "Your Jedi mind tricks don't work with me." The Jedi looked unnerved and surrendered their Jedi swords. "Follow me." They headed into a lift, and it went up 7 stories. The door chimed open. The large room they entered had bright crimson carpets, crimson curtains and grey walls. There was an honour guard of 10 men in crimson robes. Their faces were covered in red helmets with a black covering over their eyes. They were about a head taller than the average man, appeared very muscular and intimidating, with lightning defence rods. They were escorted to a throne at the end of the hall. There on the throne sat a sleek human woman. She looked young and pretty. She wore black skin-tight trousers, black boots, a crimson tunic around her waist, and a black cape. This was uncharacteristic for heads of state who usually wore long robes. She was dressed more like a fitness trainer or a mercenary than a queen. She had shoulder-length black hair. There were 2 black stripes on her face that went vertically from her forehead, across her eyes, and down to her cheeks, ending with a sharp point on each end of the stripe. She had black lips and yellow eyes. The 2 Jedi immediately sensed the force in this woman. Jingo Garkin's eyes went wide as he noticed a grey lightsaber attached to her waist belt. She had a cold, calm aura about her. Jingo used the Force to try to discern her thoughts, but they came back blank. Then she spoke. "Greetings, Outlanders. I am Malika, CEO and Chairwoman of the Gangaloria Crimson Mining Corporation and Secretary-General of the Red Council. How may I be of assistance to you?" Livian spoke and introduced herself just as she had to the commander, and she added, "We have heard reports of abuses of power, the disappearance of dissidents or unwanted visitors, also that your corporation is involved in the arming of both sides of the Alderaanian Civil War." Malika calmly listened and gave pause before speaking. "We have a lot of scum and villainy that visit our planet. Gangsters and pirates come this way. If they cross us, they usually end up dead. But I must address your comment about our weapon sales. Our corporation produces high-tech weaponry, which is fully legal in the Galactic Republic. We sell weapons to both parties, since both parties buy our products. Which side has the Republic ruled as the right side?" Livian looked dumbfounded by the question. Well, the Senate is still debating and no conclusions have been made. At least not yet. But that's not the point. The planet has suffered over 4 billion casualties. It's the greatest cataclysm to have hit the galaxy this century. It cannot be solved until both sides are disarmed. With respect, Madam CEO, your corporation is profiteering from the deaths of an entire planet. Malika was not the least bit unnerved. With respect, Madam Senator, or should I say Secretary to Senator Pellion, your Galactic Republic Senate cannot even come up with a verdict, much less a practical solution to the problem of war on Alderaan. So you have no business telling us what to do with regard to our trade practices. But thank you for your concern for the good people of Alderaan. I will mention them in my next committee meeting." Before Livian could retort, Malika turned her gaze to, of all people, Pep. "Who are you, sir?" Pep was startled by the unexpected attention he was suddenly given. "Oh, well, Your Majesty." "Just call me Malika," she said with a bright smile. "Oh, well, Malika, my name's Pep Hook. I'm a bit of a rogue trader and transport pilot. I do a lot of odd jobs. I took the party on my RD-400 spacecraft. It's a great honour to meet you, madam." "An RD-400? That's quite an antique model of spaceship," she said. Yes, Malika, it's a bit of an old bomb, but it gets us from one end of the galaxy to another. Malika looked back at him with a gleeful grin on her face. She turned to Livian. Sounds like you are low budget. Perhaps that reflects the level of importance of your diplomatic mission. Livian felt the blood rush to her face. In a mixture of rage and humiliation, she felt like throttling Malika. But Malika turned her attention to her next point of interest. What's your name? I'm Jevil, Jedi Padawan to my master Jingo Garkin. Malika smiled, eyes firmly on Jevil, not even glancing at her master. Very impressive. That must be tough being trained in the Jedi arts. Do you enjoy it? Jevil replied as if by rote. My master is firm but fair. I am being trained to use the Force so I can serve the Jedi Order well. Other girls my age play with toys or spend time with family, but my purpose is to solely focus on my Jedi skills. That's my lot in life. Malika replied, When I was your age, I wasn't allowed to play with dolls either. I had to do training, but it made me what I am. She then rose from her throne. She walked over to her desk and drew out a small rectangular box. She walked over to Jevil and opened it. There were two pretty toy dolls of a blonde human woman and a blue-skinned Twi'lek woman. She smiled and motioned to Jevil to take them. Jingo Garkin looked agitated at his Padawan receiving toys to play with, but out of the corner of his eye he saw a stern look from Livian, so he backed down. Livian knew only too well the diplomatic consequences of insults like refusing a gift. Jevil was wide-eyed with joy. Thank you so much, Malika. That's the nicest gift anyone's ever given me. Malika smiled. You're most welcome, beautiful girl, she said, giving her an affectionate pat on the head. Without really thinking, Jevil stepped forward for a hug. Malika gave her a warm embrace. Jingo Garkin looked as if steam was coming out of his ears. True, the Jedi did hug one another behind closed doors, but in public, and to an outsider, this was highly embarrassing to show such an act of affection. And what was that comment about those pathetic dolls being the nicest gift anyone had ever given her? Hadn't he given her better gifts? Hadn't he helped construct her first lightsaber? Hadn't he starved her for a week to toughen her up? Hadn't he saved her life on several occasions? After this mission, he would destroy those toys with his bare hands. Finally, Livian spoke. It is our right as a diplomatic envoy to do an investigation and a full audit of this business upon arrival. I expect your full cooperation. It's late in the day, so we shall commence first thing in the morning. Malika eyed her coolly. Very well. My chief bodyguard, Rakak, shall escort you. A tall crimson-uniformed man stepped forward and gave them a nod. Livian curtly replied, If he's going to escort us, he will do so without his mask and using verbal communication. Malika turned to him and nodded. He took off his mask. He was a light-skinned, red-headed man with a beard and moustache. There were cuts and battle scars all over his face. He exuded a lethal and sinister aura about him. In a gruff, guarded tone he said, Chief Rakak, at your service. Thank you, said Livian. He bowed his head slightly, then put his mask on again. Then to Malika. We understand you have a luxury guest hotel. We would like to stay there tonight. "As you wish," said Malika. "It's not cheap. It's 1,000 credits per person per night. Are you sure you don't just want to stay in your low-budget spaceship?" With a look of indignation, Livian said, "Oh, I'm not paying for it. The Senate will do that." Malika smiled smugly, but kept her thoughts to herself. Chapter 4. Safari and Drugs. The four of them returned to the ship, and LV-9 carried their luggage to the luxury hotel. At the wall of the city was a large tower overlooking the vast plains of Gangaloria. The view from the hotel was breathtaking. Livian paid for a suite with 4 rooms. Each room had a free minibar fridge and a lot of conveniences. Jevil could barely hide her excitement and squealed in delight at her very own room. All her life she had either slept with 50 fellow Padawan learners in the Jedi barracks or next to her master. Now she finally had some privacy to herself. But she was still excited about quality time with Livian and popped in to see her. Livian called Pep Hook and Jingo Garkin over. The hotel manager introduced himself to me earlier with an offer, so I paid for a nighttime safari outside the city. We will fly over in a tourist hovercar with spotlighting to look for some of the nocturnal beasts. They're extremely large. They dined with exquisite food that night. It was steak and vegetables with a giant egg fried sunny side up in the middle of the table, where they dipped their meat into the delicious yolk for flavour. At the opposite end of the dining hall they spotted Malika at a table with several tall men. Livian attempted eye contact, but the Gangalorian ruler ignored her. After dinner, a staff member escorted them to the top of the tower, where a hovercraft safari vehicle waited for them. They were joined by the men that had accompanied Malika. The hovercraft took off into the night sky, far above the ground. It had a bizarre, eerie sense of being away from civilization as the city behind them got smaller and smaller. It was a prehistoric planet and one of the most untouched places in the galaxy. If the ship crashed, they would be at the mercy of nature. A waiter served them wine that was particularly addictive. Even Jevil took a few drinks. So did Livian. Then off in the distance, the spotlight focused. A giant reptilian monster with 4 legs, a tail with spikes on the end, and a long snout was chasing an even larger horse-like creature. They saw the predator lunge at its prey and bite it around the neck. Then they watched the feed. The tour guide explained, "Whenever these creatures menace our city, we shoot them. Then with high-powered lifting cables, we carry their bodies into our massive refrigerated abattoirs. The masses of meat feed our population, and their eggs are delicious as well." Upon returning to the hotel, the 4 of them were too inebriated to walk straight, so the big men who had accompanied them walked them into the hotel gym and told the masseuse ladies to give them a working over. While getting their massages, the same men returned and handed out some plates with spices to each of the guests. Being drunk made them vulnerable to these mind-altering drugs. Several hours after midnight, they were carried into their rooms completely drowsy, and they were laid naked in their beds. They all fell into a deep sleep. Jevil had a dream. She was in a cave with her blue lightsaber. She was aware of a dark force trying to encroach upon her. Her lightsaber pierced the darkness. In the distance, she saw her master Jingo Garkin screaming in torment against a black shadow, wielding a red lightsaber. As the fight progressed, her master was killed, but Jevil rose victorious, and the darkness dissipated. Then she woke up. The sun was already high in the sky. Jevil wondered why her master, or Livian, hadn't woken her. As she sat up, she realised she had a headache. After she had showered and dressed, she checked on Livian, who was fast asleep. Then she saw Jingo Garkin, who was trying to beat his hangover with a bottle of vegetable juice. "Morning, kid," he mumbled absently. "Good morning, master. Don't we have an official diplomatic inspection to do?" He grunted. Yeah, that." 5 minutes later, the Jedi pair exited their suite into the hallway. There, sitting and waiting for them in the hallway lounge, was the bodyguard escort Rakak, in casual attire. Jingo Garkin approached him. "Sorry to keep you waiting, sir. I think our diplomatic mission team was a bit tired and incapacitated." Rakak rose from his seat and towered over the Jedi Master. "Perhaps Pep and Livian require medical assistance to get out of bed." "No, really, that won't be necessary," said Jingo. But before he could say more, Rakak had gone to the reception desk, who radioed help. Within less than a minute, 2 medical droids and 2 human nurses entered their rooms with injections and medicine. After being injected and forcibly showered, the 4 of them were assembled before Rakak. Their tour guide spoke. "We were supposed to go on this diplomatic inspection 5 hours ago. But since you were heavily intoxicated with drugs in your system and it's almost lunchtime, we can do the inspection after lunch. Any questions?" They shook their heads. "Very well, follow me." He led them to a factory cafe where they joined the other workers. It was a variety of foods on a tray. The workers in this factory had joy and work satisfaction, unlike the drudgery Livian was used to. Rakak informed her the workers each do about 3 days' worth of work per week for about 7 hours a shift, and still earn a full-time wage. Livian frowned. "Isn't that lazy? What else do people do with their time?" Rakak replied, "Plenty. We spend time with family, time on holidays, either on other planets or here doing safari on Gangaloria, or military training. Every man here, and 30% of the women, are military volunteers. We want a safe society and a fun society where we go through life with the utmost safety and joy that's possible. Our society works together as a team, and we achieve great things. If the rest of the galaxy wants to destroy itself with mayhem and warfare, let them do it. But out here we keep to ourselves, enjoy life, and remain vigilant to defeat pirates, traders, gangsters, and foreigners." Livian looked offended. "In the Republic, we are all in this together. All sentient beings are supposed to work together for the common good." "How's that working out?" asked Rakak. "It can work in a small closed society like ours, but not in a galactic mess like Coruscant, run by selfish politicians and trillions of sentient beings with their own species' selfish interests at heart. You can't expect that to ever work well. In our way of life, we minimise technology in our daily lives and stay in touch with nature and community." Jingo interjected. "The greatest truth of the galaxy is the Force. The Force holds all things together, and through that we can attain peace and contentment with life. The Force is real, you know. Rakak nodded to him. Yes, the Force is real, and it should be used to achieve one's goals in attaining the greatest power possible. Rakak's comment sent a chill to Jingo. Did Rakak know the ways of the Force? Jingo used the Force to discern the man's thoughts. He saw a picture in his mind of Rakak, Malika, and others doing a strange religious ritual in a cave. After lunch, they were led through several munition factories. For a small city of just 100,000 people, the scope of their work was monumental. The entire city's wealth, prosperity, and finances were connected with weapon sales. Then they had vegetable farms and big game hunting for their food supplies. Livian, in all her life, had never seen such a spectacularly well-organised, ambitious plan for group prosperity and happiness. Finally, Rakak took them into the Red Council headquarters for another discussion with Malika. Livian told her, I greatly admire your well-organised society, and I have for the most part enjoyed my stay here. We will need to return and have Pelion Skywalker petition the Senate to ban your sale of weapons and send you a massive tax bill and monitor your organisation with the possibility of bringing you to trial. Malika waited for Livian to say more, but she didn't. So she just smiled, then finally said, Do what you think you must, but remember, we are doing nothing illegal. It is doubtful your corrupt boss will do anything in the Senate. It is doubtful that the Senate will care. It is equally doubtful you will hold any credibility after your lavish spending, and I believe your use of spice drugs and overall incompetence will not give you any credibility. You were filmed and recorded by some of our concerned citizens. But you want to stop our legal munitions trade? Oh well, go ahead and try. I wish you a safe return to Coruscant. 20 minutes later, Livian was back in their ship and had finally managed to get a hologram signal to her senator. After explaining the situation, Pelion Skywalker asked her, You say it's just a small town of 100,000 people. Yes, replied Livian. I just need your permission to dispatch LV-9 to kill their leader. Then we can destroy their society without a long, wasteful senatorial debate that will drag on for years and waste taxpayers' money. Let's assassinate this bitch, throw their society into disarray, and if they persist in weapon production, we send in an army to wipe them out. Pelion nodded. I love your ability to make snap decisions. You have my permission to destroy her. May the Force be with you. After he had hung up, Pelion was aboard his hovercraft with two of his girlfriends, attired in fancy evening dresses. They headed off to the Galactic Opera Show, where he would meet the Supreme Chancellor and other politicians for a night of heavy drinking, feasting and entertainment. Back on Gangaloria, Malika and 4 bodyguards headed over to the hotel for dinner. Unknown to her, LV-9 waited for a clear shot. Chapter 5. Battle. With lightning speed, LV-9 fired at his target. Just as the shot rang out, Malika had whipped out a lightsaber. A red lightsaber. She had deflected his shot, and his 2 shots killed 2 of her bodyguards. The other 2 returned fire and hit LV-9. What transpired next was shocking. Malika leaped high into the sky and landed directly in front of the assassin droid. She had chopped him in half down the middle before her feet had even touched the ground. Sparks flew in all directions as she reduced him to scrap metal. "Impressive, most impressive," said Jingo Garkin at her apparent force abilities. Then the two Jedi ignited their lightsabers. His was green and Jevils was blue. Malika was approaching them. Her two guards and an entourage of 30 stormtroopers were behind her with their blasters aimed on the visitors. By now they had their backs to their spaceship. Malika spoke. "Under Republic law, trying to assassinate a leader is illegal and an act of war. Surrender now, make a full confession to the Senate, and your lives will be spared and you will be treated decently. Resist, and we have no choice but to kill you." Livian was not interested in negotiations, so she said, "Never." The stormtroopers opened fire on them, but the Jedi lightsabers blocked their blasters. However, one stray laser hit Livian in the leg and she shrieked, falling. Pep caught and carried her into the ship. The Jedi used the Force to knock the stormtroopers flat, just as they fled into the ship, and it was sealed shut. But Malika leaped through the air, right above the pilot's cockpit, and plunged her lightsaber into the roof above the pilot's seat. Pep Hook was about to take off when he saw the lightsaber make a hole in his spaceship. "Try breathing in space with this," she said with a laugh. She then leapt backwards into the air, joining her soldiers. The RD-400 took off without a shot being fired, but they could not leave the atmosphere of Gangaloria, so they flew out of the city and headed off into the wilderness. 1 kilometre behind them, 2 flying spy droid probes followed. The wind blew furiously into the cockpit. They flew about 20 kilometres away and landed on some open grass. Pep grabbed his honing device and began scouring the ship for tracking devices. He found 3. He removed them and left them on the ground. The 2 Jedi stood guard with their lightsabers and Livian with Pep's blaster. Jingo Garkin closed his eyes in meditation. He reached out with the Force, sensing danger. The rest of the crew then saw the 2 probe droids dragged into the light, and he used the Force to smash them together. He leapt onto the top of the cockpit, using the Force with Jevil. They had an extra piece of metal cut out from one of the interior walls. It was placed over the hole, and their lightsabers welded it into the roof without so much as a crack. Jingo then grabbed 2 small moisture-collecting devices for himself and Jevil and a small bag of food. He gave his instructions. "Pep and Livian, you must return to Coruscant immediately and inform Pelion Skywalker. Fly 100 kilometres south, then fly into space and head off immediately. Jevil and I will return to the city on foot and finish off Malika. She is too dangerous to be kept alive. I have no idea if she's a dark Jedi or just a witch using the Force or a throwback from the Sith Empire, but she needs to be eliminated." Pep shook his head. "I can't let you do this. As the ship's captain, it's my responsibility to take you all back safely." Jingo Garkin gave Pep a hug. "Don't worry about us, brother. We're Jedi. We have greater responsibilities than returning home right now." "But how will you get home safely?" asked Livian, hugging him next. "We can steal a ship from their city," he replied. Pep and Livian hugged and kissed Jevil. She said to Livian, "Please look after my dolls for me while we're gone." "I will guard them with my life," she replied. Livian felt close to tears as the little girl headed off with her master. Jingo, Garkin and Jevil reached out to the Force and leaped high into the air, then landed on the ground, ran some more, leaped again, and were off into the night. Pep and Livian headed into the pilot's cockpit. Pep turned on the engine and was about to take off. Livian grabbed him by the face, kissed him on the lips, and sat back down. Pep looked stunned and love-struck for a moment, then grinned and took off into space. They held hands in what was a beautiful and romantic moment. The Jedi were honing their Force abilities in this exercise in preparation for the attack. They heard loud stomping noises in the distance. They were being pursued. "Stop," ordered Jingo. A two-legged reptilian beast about 5 times as tall as a man was approaching. It had short arms, a long tail and a long snout with protruding fangs. "Go on, Jevil," he said. "Prove yourself without my help." The beast roared. Jevil used the Force to lunge through the air and cut off the beast's snout as it attempted to devour her. Almost an instant later she had decapitated it and gently landed on its fallen corpse. Using their lightsabers, they cut open its body and sliced pieces of thin steak which were now roasting from their fiery blades. They filled up on water and continued their northward march. They heard a thunderous noise heading their way. It was a stampede. Giant hoofed herbivores about 3 times the height of a man were charging in their direction. Without hesitating, they simply leaped into the air and jumped off the backs of the herd, continuing on their mission. Coming behind the herd was a group of giant lizards about the size of a man. They had huge mouths with wickedly sharp needle teeth and large spines on their backs. They were a mixture of bright red, yellow and green in colour. They lunged at both Jedi, but without hesitation the Guardians of Galactic Peace had destroyed them, and the lizards began cannibalistically feasting on the bodies of their dead comrades. Before they knew it, they were within sight of the city. They Force leaped to the top of the wall. A stormtrooper turned, but using the Force, Jingo choked the man, and he fell off the wall. Then they gently glided to the ground. They darted between houses and slowly made their way ever closer to the palace. Jevil whispered to her master, "For a city that's just had an assassination attempt, security seems extremely quiet, almost non-existent. You'd think we're only in here because they allowed it." Jingo Garkin frowned, realising he could not deny this fact. It gave an eerie feeling. Soon they saw the Imperial Palace. They sneaked around the back, cut a hole in the door and walked in. It was pitch black. They sensed they were being watched. Jevil and Jingo ignited their lightsabers and could make out silhouettes at the end of the room. "Fire!" a man's voice barked. The room was jam-packed with stormtroopers who opened fire and lit up the entire room. The Jedi began deflecting the laser shots with their lightsabers, sending them back to the stormtroopers. But there was something eerie and unsettling that caught their attention. They were not firing lethal shots. Their blasters were in stun mode. All the stormtroopers being hit with their deflective blasts were falling unconscious, but not dead. They charged up several flights of stairs, hoping to find Malika's sleeping quarters. Off in the distance they could hear shouts and orders being given. Time was ticking away. They ran into the throne room. Jingo could sense Malika watching him nearby, and with her the dark side of the Force. Then a light came on. Out walked Malika with her red lightsaber. "Greetings, Jedi. Did you come back to apologise? Or did you just miss me? I see you had no obstacles returning." As she was speaking, a dozen Crimson Guards stood behind her motionless. The two Jedi slowly approached her. Malika thrust out her hand and lightning hit Jevil. Jingo Garkin gasped. "Only the Sith did that. She's a Sith. They survived. Were the legends true that Darth Vader escaped the war of extermination waged by the Jedi 2 centuries ago? Did he institute the rule of two, one Sith master to wield the power and an apprentice to crave it? His thoughts were interrupted as his lightsaber blocked her volley of lightning. Next, they were in a wild and passionate lightsaber duel. The revelation of her being a Sith and his injured apprentice fueled his rage. He roared in anger as he smashed his lightsaber against her. Between blows, Malika said, "If only you knew the power of the dark side, Jedi Master. It is your destiny. Use your anger, use your fears, your pain. They will give you strength. You can never defeat me with the light side of the Force. Embrace your true identity." "Never! I'll never join the Sith. You're supposed to be dead. I'll finish what the Jedi couldn't do 2 centuries ago." His anger and rage drove him on, and he was starting to get the upper hand. Then Jevil leapt into battle. She noticed Jingo's eyes were turning yellow. Malika yelled, "Now!" They opened fire on the Jedi who were busy fighting the Sith Master. Jevil blocked them and began killing the guards. Jingo's anger was consuming him, and he did not notice the blaster fire hit him. Then everything went black. Chapter 6. Jingo Garkin's Trial. Pep and Livian were enjoying their romantic but exhausting journey home. With no droid to fly for them, Pep had to teach Livian on the spot how to fly a spacecraft. It was a terrifying prospect prior to this, but with her rough diamond of a man teaching her, she felt confident. They took turns flying while the other slept. When she awoke, and he was not too tired, they spent quality time together. Livian thought to herself, "As soon as I get back to Coruscant, I'm resigning from my career and riding off into the sunset with my man. I want a quiet, peaceful planet with good social services to start a family before I'm too old." Pep was very excited to finally have a woman that actually loved him. He couldn't believe how fortunate he was. In the past, the only women that had given him any loving were the ones he had paid for on sleazy, dangerous bars in backwater planets. He was prepared to make radical changes to his life to ensure that this relationship worked. She looked at him and said, "I really wish I'd said yes to you 5 years ago when we first met. Maybe then we would have kids now and be living on some idyllic, peaceful location. Instead, we're risking our lives for a lazy buffoon. I feel so bad that I wouldn't even give you a chance." Pep said, "It's all good, love. Don't be too harsh on yourself. The main thing is, we're together now. And besides, this mission was important. If it helps end the war on my beloved home planet, it will have been worth it. Many people dream of a peaceful and prosperous Alderaan. Perhaps we will achieve it one day." Livian said wistfully, I wish we could adopt that sweet little Jevil. She's a beautiful girl, being made into some heartless, soulless Jedi machine. It breaks my heart. I mean, I know we need the Jedi for galactic peace, but can't they be a little bit more humane to those Jedi children? Pep nodded. The same thought crossed my mind, but with the Jedi, that's fanciful thinking. You can't reason with the Jedi. Too stubborn, too determined to achieve their goals. She nodded, looking sad. Livian squeezed his hand. I think it's time for you to get some sleep, darling. Okay, fine. But remember, if you have any navigation issues, wake me up immediately. No, I won't, she replied. I've got the hang of it. He kissed her, then retired to his quarters. Back on Gangaloria, another fanciful plan for Jevil was playing out. Jedi Master Jingo Garkin slowly awoke. He was chained on his arms and legs, suspended in the air. Rakak was sitting facing him. He reached out with the Force to choke him, but the barriers he was entrapped in had greatly reduced his Force abilities. Rakak radioed Malika. She walked in and eyed him up and down. How are you going, my Jedi friend? I am not your friend, he said coldly. Where is Jevil? Oh, she's out and about. Don't worry about her. She'll be here to rescue you shortly, said Malika, in her pleasant but sarcastic tone. Then in a more serious tone she said, The Jedi have trained you well, but they only ever taught you half-truths. I sense much fear in you, Jingo. You could use it to become so powerful. Jingo said, Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Malika added, and suffering increases your power in the dark side. Through this power your chains are broken. Just then they could hear yelling in the distance. The door was flung open and in charged Jevil, who slammed the door behind her. Using her lightsaber, she melted the door's lock so reinforcements couldn't come to their aid. Rakak charged at her, but she nimbly dodged his laser blasts and plunged her lightsaber right through his guts. Malika laughed in good humour. Get out of here, save yourself, moaned Jingo. It's a trap. Malika shot a volley of Sith lightning into Jingo. He wrenched around in agony. She shot another one at Jevil, but the Padawan calmly absorbed it into her lightsaber. While slowly approaching Malika like a hunter after its prey, she spoke to Jingo without averting her gaze. Your biggest threat to your soul is not Malika, but your inner struggle with the dark side of the Force. Your thoughts betray your inner conflict, Master. Every bit of anger, resentment, and inner turmoil has brought you to this state of vulnerability to the dark side. If Malika defeats us, it is better to be righteous in defeat than unrighteous in victory. But Jingo muttered, I'm getting out of this mess one way or another. No, Master, be faithful unto death. Then Jevil spoke to Malika. Your thoughts betray you also. Those dolls you gave me were tracking devices. Malika gasped. This little girl could penetrate her mind. Even Jingo couldn't do that. Yes, you are the surviving Sith line from Darth Bane. You are plotting to one day rule the galaxy again. In the next moment, the two were locked in a lightsaber duel, destroying tables and chairs and anything in the way. Jingo was stunned by the accelerated progress Jevil had made in her time alone in the space of a day. The stress had made her rely on the Force like never before. It had taught her more effectively than her master could ever hope to. Malika withdrew as Jevil almost overwhelmed her. Jevil spoke again. "So, you're almost 100 years old, but have used the Force to prolong your life. And now you are desperately looking for an apprentice." Jevil was so distracted by tapping into Malika's mind and fighting her that she did not notice Jingo struggling in the corner. Malika let out a volley of lightning, but instead of Jevil absorbing it, she deflected it back at Malika, and Malika fell to the ground, dropping her lightsaber. Now it was time to kill the Sith Lord and end Darth Bane's lineage once and for all. Jingo let out a haunting scream and, using the Force, smashed himself free of the chains. He then flew across the room and, using the Force, he caught Malika's lightsaber in his hand. Before either of them had time to react, Jingo Garkin plunged the Sith lightsaber into his apprentice. She just looked at him wide-eyed and in disbelief. Then she slumped down dead. He let out a roar and raised his arms in triumph. Out of his hands, lightning shot, hitting the ceiling. Stormtroopers and Crimson bodyguards entered the room, having shot down the door. He looked behind him. Malika had risen. With a gesture, she signalled to the men to hold their fire. "Well done, Jingo Garkin. Now complete your training and reach your destiny. Join the Sith. Become my apprentice, my son, my successor, Dark Lord of the Sith." Jingo Garkin said, "Yes, I will join you." "Follow me," said Malika. They left the building, accompanied by dozens of stormtroopers and Crimson Guards. They entered a haunting and creepy cathedral. Malika said, "This is the ruins of an ancient Sith temple. It's about 3,000 years old, long abandoned for countless centuries. That's why we built our city around it." Inside the ancient building was statues of strange-looking robed figures. She pointed to one and said, "That's Frida Nad," and to another, "That's a statue of the earliest known Sith species from almost 30,000 years ago." It had the eeriest and creepiest feeling imaginable. Malika said, "You have plenty of time to study our history and philosophy, but for now we will focus on the job at hand." Malika ordered him to strip naked and throw his Jedi robes into a fire nearby. He then pledged himself to the Sith. Malika presented him with black robes and a Sith lightsaber. Jingo Garkin said, "If only I had known the power of the dark side." He knelt before her. Malika put her hand on his shoulder. "I anoint you, Darth Malice. Rise, Lord Malice. From now on you will know me by my real name, Darth Crevice." The stormtroopers and bodyguards raised their hand outstretched in front of them, hailing their master's new apprentice. Darth Crevice then spoke. "Darth Malice, we must intercept and stop Livian's journey back to Coruscant." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, "but it's Too late for that. They left 2 days ago and have too much of a head start for us to catch them." "On the contrary," said Darth Crevice, "we have ships that can make it to Coruscant in twice that time. But we must leave immediately." "What about the tracking device in Jevel's dolls?" he asked. "Oh, them? They're only good for tracking if you're on the same planet. That means we can track them once they're both on Coruscant, but not before then. We will fly in my R800 solar dart cruiser." Within 10 minutes, 2 Crimson Guards to pilot the ship and their Sith passengers were boarded up for flight. The ship was small and inconspicuous, with only a small cockpit, a storage room, a bathroom, and the passenger aisle with just 2 lounges for sleeping and sitting on. It was golden in colour and shaped like an arrowhead. The ship took off immediately, and before Darth Malus could say his new name, they were racing through space at a speed he had never anticipated. Chapter 7. Riding Off into the Sunset. Every bone in Livian's body told her she was mad to fall in love with a rough, unsophisticated navigator. But so what? She could teach him to be cultured and refined. He had such great potential. She knew her parents and sisters would not approve. They would say she was desperate and settling for a low-quality husband. Yet she envied her younger sisters who had husbands and children of their own, and the thought of missing out on these things was precisely why she no longer cared what anyone would say about her life and choices. She loved Pep, and Pep loved her. That's all that mattered. But she would buy him some brand new clothes and give him a crash course in etiquette before introducing him to them. Livian and her family were natives born and bred in Coruscant, but she longed for a quieter and more peaceful planet to settle in, and would persuade her extended family to join her. She regretted not doing this years ago. She had amassed considerable income in her savings as a career woman over the past 20 years. But what was the use of her career if it didn't give her the joy of a family and a happy life? Later that night, as Livian slept, Pep Hook looked out at the ever-growing planet Coruscant that was becoming bigger and bigger as he neared the end of the journey. He thought to himself, "Well, our journey is almost over. Hopefully Jingo and Jevel have destroyed that crazy dictator, and I can see them again and hear all the details. But I left this planet as a lonely never-do-well. Now I'm returning, a hero with a beautiful woman. I feel like the luckiest man in the galaxy." He briefly left the cockpit to awaken his beloved. She leapt out of bed and joined him in the cockpit. As they approached the capital planet of the galaxy, a bright red sunrise was making its way over the vast urban jungle. It was the most perfect and beautiful imagery that they had ever beheld. They held hands, then turned to each other and kissed. Pep said to her, "Livian, hark, I'm not one for fancy words and elaborate speeches, so I'll just say what's on my heart. Livian, will you marry me?" She smiled and affectionately stroked him on the head. "Yes, of course I will." They kissed again. A few minutes later, they had landed atop Pelion Skywalker's launching pad. A smaller, golden-coloured spaceship was parked nearby. As they opened the door, 2 black-robed figures stood waiting for them. The first one lifted his hood to reveal his face. "Why, if it isn't Jedi Master Jingo Garkin, wait, how did you get in here so quickly? No time for that. We need to talk. In your spaceship, immediately. The four of them entered the ship. Livian said, "What's wrong with your eyes? They've turned yellow." Darth Malice ignored the remark. Then she asked, "Where's Jevil?" "Ah, Jevil," he said with a chuckle. "She was killed. Too weak and cowardly." Something about his callous tone set her on edge. "Who are you?" asked Pep to the mysteriously shrouded companion of Jingo Garkin. She stepped forward and, without saying a word, removed her covering. Livian's heart missed a beat. Then Livian let out a shriek, and she saw the Jedi Master ignite a red lightsaber and run it through her fiancé. Pep simply stared, too shocked for words, as his life ebbed away. "I love you, Livian. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Livian screamed, but moments later, Malika ended her life with a lightsaber through the heart, not uttering a word. The Sith duo then walked downstairs, one level to Pelion Skywalker's penthouse of pleasure and decadence. The security guards had already been force-choked by the Sith and their corpses thrown off the building. Bodies that landed would end up in the sewers and either be eaten by rodents or collected by doctors for organ harvesting. Lying on the couches were two motionless women that had overdosed on spice drugs. They were dead. Pelion awoke in his bedroom. The random escort he had slept with the night before was long gone, but another figure stood looking over him ominously. He sat up, hungover from the night before. "Who are you?" he asked, getting out of bed with no clothes on. "Nobody important," she said casually. "Just someone with a nice surprise for you in gratitude for that assassination attempt you ordered in Gangaloria." Skywalker looked alarmed. Darth Crevice ignited her lightsaber and lifted it between his legs. He screamed just as the lightsaber went slowly up his crotch, through his stomach, until he was sliced in half. He still showed signs of life as her blade made its upward cut through his head. By cutting slowly through his body, she had ensured that no blood was left behind. They had also disabled his camera security system. His two body halves were rolled up into a sheet, and Darth Malice carried them into Pep's spaceship. They also seized Pelion's passport, bank cards and ID documents and threw them into the sheets. It would appear that the senator had left two women for dead in his apartment and fled the scene like the coward that he was. He would not be remembered kindly. Crevice retrieved her two dolls, then got aboard their dart ship. They hovered above Pep's ship and levers came out and attached themselves to it. The ship took off for the industrial region of Coruscant on the other side of the planet. Within 10 minutes, they were at the Intergalactic Industrial Steelworks plant. It was a vast sea of lava. The owners would pay for scrap metal, but sometimes people had their own reasons to simply dump unused vehicles for free. The owners had a strict don't ask, don't tell policy, and it gave them plenty of metal without paying for it. The dart ship hovered far above the lava lake and dropped the last pieces of evidence for the murders of Pep Hook, Livian Hark and Pelion Skywalker into the fiery ocean. The ship exploded upon impact, then slowly descended into hell. It was barely breakfast time for the average senator, and their mission had already been accomplished. The dart ascended gloriously into the heavens. The Sith had vanished once again into the obscurity of a chaotic and ever-busy galaxy of trillions of beings, all trying to find their way in life. The end.